Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next installment of GEMA Talks. I am thrilled to have with us today Diana Williams. Diana currently is the producer of content creation and franchise strategy for Madison Wells, which is a leading production company in the entertainment industry. And I'm really excited to talk to her about the whole concept of what franchise strategy means and how do you build franchises in the content world. You know, she's had a really prolific career really in content creation, production, and most interestingly in virtually every format, as you'll see when we talk today. So really excited to have her with us today. Diana, how are you today?
Hi, Rich. I'm thrilled to be here.
Okay, thanks. It's great I'm glad we're doing this finally. It's awesome.
Yes.
So, you know, as I'm thinking about how to best proceed with this chat, I do think, because you've had such an interesting career path and career arc, I thought it would make sense to really talk from the beginning. And I think it really will help inform everyone of how you've got to where you are today and obviously very fascinating part of the business that you work in. So I'm going to let's go back to the early days and talk about really your start at Georgetown and kind of you go to Georgetown and you were in the business school undergrad, right? So why don't you talk a little bit about when you got to Georgetown, what you were thinking, why business school, what were you thinking you'd want to do with your career, and how did your experience at Georgetown start kind of influencing what you did as you upon graduation and beyond?
I don't come from entertainment. I grew up in like a farming community in South Jersey. But I understood like the power of entertainment. So this is in the 70s and 80s. And so
yeah.
I really wanted to understand the business of it. So I was intent on going to Wall Street, but what I wanted to do was analyze entertainment companies. Again, this is well before Premier Magazine had started, this is before people talked about box office and people's contracts and who's doing what on a set and what TV show got picked up. There were 3 channels. Everybody went to the same movie on that one weekend. But I knew that there was a business there. And so when I got to school, this was at the same time in which Gulf and Western owned Paramount, a Japanese company, Matsushita, which had just bought Universal. This was before Sony. So Coca-Cola owned Columbia Pictures. And so these were all companies that were listed on various stock exchanges that ran the Dow. Coca-Cola absolutely was one of the Dow 30. And I wanted to learn more about it because the way I was looking at it is that as an investment banker, as a stock analyzer, anything that you, if you're picking one of these stocks, if you're picking Coca-Cola to go into a teacher's pension fund or something, and then the stock went down because a movie tanked, I wanted to understand more about entertainment.
Yeah.
So I really tried to figure out how to gear my education towards that. But again, let me repeat, this is the 80s. So everything at that point, it was still brick and mortar. And, you know, as I joke around, Al Gore had not invented the internet yet. So it was still about widgets and IBM and brick and mortar stores and apparel and just like, it's still about clothing, but I mean, it was always about that stuff. So that's how a lot of the classes were taught. And I was trying to deal with like, well, what about film? What about television? What about those things that still in mass bring about money? And this all happened was one of my favorite movies, of course, is Terminator. And I remember sitting in that dark theater and it cut across ethnicity, it cut across gender, and everybody was in rapt attention to the screen. And I just started counting the heads, and every screening was sold out in my little town in New Jersey. And I just thought that there's so much power here in the image, and it was such a thriving business. So I really had to work hard, and there were quite a few teachers in the business school that weren't thrilled with what I was doing because they just didn't know how to apply it to what they were teaching. And at that point, everything was about like, I think if I remember correctly, Citibank had just had like a terrible quarter or something. This is also after the stock market crash of '86. Right. So
you were challenging them maybe on some of their theories
Yeah,
and
I was
philosophy?
trying to make it apply to something that at that point was not seen as a quote unquote product.
Right,
It
right,
was something that you went to. It just wasn't a mover shaker in anything. It wasn't the entertainment that we have today. It wasn't even a classification. So I kept trying to change my course of study around to make it make sense, whether it was accounting or finance or national management, anything. I wanted to make it work. So there was quite a few kerfuffles at Georgetown for that. And then Father Byrne, bless his soul, really came to my rescue and helped me figure out and kind of smooth some feathers for me to be able to proceed with this course of study. And so I always, and even with my internships, I try to make it in a way that I was always discussing entertainment in a way. So it wasn't easy, but it also it gave a great challenge to me to try to figure it out when there wasn't really methodology there. I mean, at that point, it really still was about, it was only like USC and Columbia and UCLA and NYU in terms of film schools. It just wasn't a thing.
yeah.
So it taught me a lot to try to be scrappy, going to the library, reading up on everything, that's when I started just reading Variety every day and how to report it, to learn about the business.
Yeah.
And so then, by the time, towards graduation in '89, I had a good amount of offers to work in investment banking firms. And I had one of the main offers, I had asked to take a year off because I wanted to learn how you made a movie. Because the biggest issue I was seeing, and it's still an issue today, is that, so if I decide I want to make a chair, I go through R&D, I try to source where the materials are going to come from. That's where a lot of my expenses, the blue skying of what kind of chair I want to make and manufacture. Once it gets figured out, technically my cost per chair goes down the more I manufacture.
Yeah.
Film does not work that.
And you have a very good feel for what those costs are. They're not going to.
Exactly. You have a feel for what the costs are. There aren't any surprises except if all of your leather is not available. If all of a sudden there's no cows, you can't make your leather, whatever it is. But you're pretty much 99% sure what your costs are. Film does not operate that way. And the cost of film always goes up. And I felt that to be the most efficient and successful investment banker looking at the entertainment sector, it would be better if I understood what entertainment was. I understood who the movers and shakers were, why cost of film is what it is, just to kind of just understand it. So I moved myself out to LA. I don't know anybody. I'm just
pretty bold move.
The brazenness of the 20-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, just,
right.
When you don't think about all the obstacles and the challenges, you just kind of go for it. So yeah, it was pretty scary. I moved out there actually after I moved out, then a really great friend from my class, Monica Taylor, moved out. So at least we were together trying to figure this out.
That helps.
Yeah, and so I luckily, Melissa Bradley, also a classmate, was concerned about me and gave me a stack of cards of people to call. And one of them was Howard Weitzman, whose son had who was about to go to Georgetown, I think. And I worked for Howard for a year as kind of like this paralegal financial analyst, and which was great. I was able to really pull on what I did learn at Georgetown for this job while I was trying to figure out how to get into the industry. And Howard knew that I wanted to get into the industry and had heard about the DGA training program. And so it just kind of gave me this pamphlet. He's like, you should try for this. And I was like, all right, what the heck?
And why don't you tell the audience who may not know what that is, just quickly what that is?
So DGA, so Directors Guild of America, they have a training program which is to train assistant directors. Assistant directors are the team for the directors. The first AD, the second AD, the first AD, the key second AD, and the second AD, and then the DGA trainee. Sometimes you'll see it listed as DGC trainee, that's for Directors Guild of Canada. So it's a way to get into the guild, you learn production. And so, I know nothing. And I was like, sure, I'll apply. And I don't know what exactly is the application process now, but back then you put in your application. I can't remember what is a big number of people that are then selected to basically take this test. As kind of like an alpha Uber SAT test.
I mean, it's a tremendously competitive process.
Yes. So my year, I believe about 1,800 people applied and 15 people got in. I think that was the number.
Wow.
I heard that it's just exponentially larger now.
Wow.
But I was able to get in. I mean, I made some mistakes along the way because I think it was like basically 4 different stages you had to go through. And then the last stage was you're interviewed by all these ADs and UPMs, and it's like a big dealio. You're in the big room with the big table, and it's like you sit down. It's crazy. And I gave an answer, which is the answer is supposed to absolutely make sure you don't get in. And I was asked where I saw myself in 10 years. Again, I repeat, this is 1990. Still not a lot known about film. I came from a farming community, so I don't know all the positions. I don't know what there is in film. I know one thing, and it's the only thing that's ever been talked about, which is the director.
Yeah.
So I give the answer like, oh, in 10 years, I'm going to be a director. And as I heard later on, it was a big fight if they were going to let me in or not, because I gave the wrong answer, because the DGA, the program is to have you on the production track. So you work your way up, first AD, then maybe UPM, then line producer, and then into producing. But I didn't know.
You had thought maybe it meant you become a director because all those titles have director in them, but it's actually not. That's not the track.
Exactly. And I just had to throw an answer out there because I knew nothing else. I couldn't say like production exec, VP of production. I didn't know any of that stuff.
But you got it anyway.
Yeah. So I was able to get in anyway. It was a big fight because I guess at that point I was like the youngest trainee admitted, and I given the wrong, everything was wrong, but they were like, we think that there's something there about you, which was great. So that's always great to have that boost of confidence. And so that's a 400 working day program in Los Angeles. It's a different number in New York. And it was great. My first show was soap dish. I learned a ton. I mean, I literally walked on set and they're like, here's your walkie. And then you're going to be dealing with first team. And I'm like, what's first team? Like,
So they don't even give you like a 1-month orientation.
Really. They do. They definitely, they do a really great job of getting you up to getting on that first, but then you get on the first day of set and it's it's 200 people and everybody's running around. They know what they're doing. There's excitement. And you're just like, I have forgotten everything I've been told.
Right.
So that was an amazing experience. And interesting is that like the AD team that I ended up working with on that show, from my very first show, ended up being the team that once I graduated, they're like, we want you on our team. And so I became their second after graduating and then getting into the Directors Guild. So I did a lot of television and feature films with them. But at the same time, I started producing. So I was living with this guy, Michael Whalen, who's now, he's the dean of the film school at Santa Clara. Oh, wow. And he was doing a documentary and asked me to produce it. And so I didn't know what producing was, but it seemed like it was organizing, and being A-type and from Georgetown, I was like, I can organize this. I can figure this out. And we shot in Ireland, all throughout California. But we ended up getting like nominated for a bunch of stuff and won a bunch of awards. And I think it was a student Oscar thing too. Like there was a lot that went on with that. This is also the same time when, Rich, I'm sure you remember this. Yeah. It was like the explosion of cable. It was like the land of 200 channels. Absolutely. And so we were getting approached to basically do a lot of those documentaries which first started out, the reality shows of like the team sitting in basically emergency rooms waiting for people to come in, and then you film them. And yeah, we did a lot of that. And so I just continued to produce documentaries, but because it was going well, I started getting sent scripts. So now we're getting into like the late 90s, which is like really the boon of independent film. That was when New York was coming out hard.
Right. Sundance had come out and gotten big.
Sundance has started on its real upswing. I think starting around 89, if I remember correctly, that's when Sex, Lies, and Videotape.
Sex, Lies, and Videotape, yep.
Yeah, and so they were on their real upswing. Other festivals were starting to grow as well. And so I really moved into producing narrative fiction features at that point. And it was great. It was all scrappy. We were still shooting on film, but that was at the same time when Indigent, great New York company, had really, we were starting to now shoot shoot digitally. And this is where it's like understanding history and how things work. Like, people need to understand that back then you shot digitally, which saved you money on production. You then still had to transfer back to film, which was another huge cost. And the reason being was that the theaters only had film distribution, that's the only way they would screen movies. And so it wasn't until, and I give all credit to George Lucas and Star Wars Episode 1, because he shot digitally, and then the theaters had to transfer over to digital projection if they wanted to have Star Wars.
Yeah.
And so that really helped independent film. That really helped us to be able to not have to transfer back to film. And it was great being a part of all those amazing producers during that time period, where we're really figuring out like how to shoot, what we want, and the stories we wanted to tell. That's also when like stories started to change. I mean, they were always out there, going back to Cassavetes and Oscar Michaud and all these different types of stories that weren't quote unquote the studio films, the 4-quadrant, how do we get everybody into the theater at once. And that was just a great time to be making films. But for me, I've always been interested in all kinds of storytelling. I was that kid.
Before you go on, I think it's important to note at this point that your interest in going to Wall Street to become an entertainment industry analyst.
Oh, right.
And now, I assume that now gone by the way, you now suddenly realize that's not what you wanted to do.
Yeah, somewhere around I think my third movie as a DGA trainee, and at the same time as when I did start producing documentaries, I was like, oh, I like this, because it still worked my business brain, especially on the producing side, because you're trying to figure out how to get the financing in. I could talk to financiers. They understood that I respected their money. They understood that I could talk to the creative as well. I was that translator between the two sides.
But interestingly, if you hadn't taken that year off, because you could have easily not taken the year off and gone right to one of these investment banks, and you may not have ever ended up in Hollywood or on the production side.
Exactly. I would have, and I think I probably would have still done well, but I think it
would have been different.
It would have been different. And I think that there's something missing when you are analyzing and looking at something or making judgment calls on something, and you don't fundamentally understand how something gets made in that industry.
Right.
That's why I always appreciate people like Warren Buffett, who understands everything that he gets into when he decides what to put into his funds.
Yeah. So anyway, just so I didn't interrupt, but you were starting to talk about, but you really interested in all formats. I think you were starting.
All formats. Yeah. I'm just a super curious person. And like, look, I wasn't a big reader growing up, which is always to my mother's chagrin. I mean, she, ran the library, so I just made her insane. So she started me on comic books. Like, she started buying me Batman and Superman, and that was really what I read, and I loved that format. And she was the one that also, because the comic book guy that ran the local store, I was an anomaly. I was like this little black girl that was reading all these comic books in my town. And he was the one who mentioned to my mom, he's like, look, there's this movie that's going to be opening, it's kind of far away because the movie theater was far away from us. And he's like, it's called Star Wars or something. And he goes, I think Diana might like it. And so my mom literally stood in line to take me to see Star Wars.
Wow.
So I was like longtime geek, and that kind of different kind of storytelling.
Yeah.
And so then as I started producing, I just was always interested in, just going back again to my mom, the other thing that she did how she figured out that I wasn't a big reader of regular books, she would read a story, and then I would always say, and then what? I wanted to know what else would happen when a book or something would end. And so that curiosity carries over into kind of everything that I do. It's just that idea of how do we remain with the story? How do we remain with those characters? How do we continue on this journey? And that's sequels for films now. And what we really call now is as transmedia or multimedia or whatever the hippity hoppity phrase is that everybody uses now.
Yeah.
But I was always interested in that idea of where else stories can be told and how they are told. So I am also, as you can tell, an insanely curious person. So I just wanted to learn other things, because also as a producer, your job is not only as translator and getting things done, but it's understanding how to allow people who have been hired for the production to be their best, and to making sure they have the tools and they have everything in their path to be their best and to do what they've been hired to do and to really show their skill and their talent. So when I was working on Star Trek, I would hang out with Michael Westmore to learn about makeup effects, because I had the early call. I was the first one on Generation. I was working on Generations,
Oh, wow.
and
Yeah.
I had the early call. So I had to come in with the first Ferengi or whatever was getting made, and here's a 3 a.m. call. And so I would learn about makeup effects. I then hang out with visual effects guys at the end and learn about that, because they would always come on set and they're like, oh, we can't do this, or trying to figure out green screen or whatever else. And so I learned a lot about visual effects just hanging out after my 16-hour workday, just to learn more about what they did, because I knew at one point I wanted to produce those kinds of films. So I figured it would always just be helpful to know that stuff. So I just kind of continued on that path, and I did a lot of producing. But then, in 2001, with the crash, a lot of tech money, which had been in the industry, especially in the indie industry, and was funding a lot of films, fled. And as did some real estate money. And so that also started to change the industry tremendously. That was when, the same time that like Disney bought Miramax, and Warner had started Warner Independent Films, and October Films had been bought. So these distribution companies that we as independent producers and filmmakers were used to having at all the festivals were getting gobbled up, and they had also changed their methodology. So they became very dependent on making sure that, did your film have a big star in it or something.
Right.
And that was also the rise of packaging with the agencies, which then also put into, people are always still confused as to what producers do, which is ridiculous to me. But it really just became like, oh, I'm just here to manage the package, the crappy package that you put together because you could sell it and you made your, extra 15% on it.
Right.
I didn't see what my fit was
Yeah.
in that industry. So I kind of took off, moved myself to Asia. I learned animation in Japan. I learned more visual effects. Spent a lot of time in China because I just really wanted to just understand more of the players that were there and what they were doing. And this is still really before the industry like knew of China,
Right.
but just
yeah, they're like, I know that on the map.
Yeah, they're like, they're there. There's a lot of people, and they should be buying our stuff, but we don't understand. It's like, because you didn't really try to have a conversation with them. So it was a lot of learning I did, and so I came back to the States just in time for the financial meltdown of 2007, 2008, and the Writers Guild strike, and started my company, which is super ill time. That was when I'm not paying attention to what I learned at Georgetown, which is like, read the room,
Yeah, right.
read the economy.
Yeah.
So, but I ended up doing a lot of work with BET as a kind of like producer who would come in and help with productions in terms of the creative, as well as the actual shooting of the projects. Worked with some great creators, Kenya Barish and Reggie Rock Bythewood. And then at that time was when I got the call to come to Lucasfilm. And it was interesting because I had been working, I had done some work at Disney, working on Muppets to build out with this great guy. And then I had also had done a documentary on ILM. And so I knew the companies, and also backtracking, I'd done my senior thesis on Disney. I really, especially back then, and still to a point now, even though with the conglomerates that are going on, it's getting less so, but Disney was the only company that was vertically and horizontally integrated without becoming a monopoly. So I was always, I always admired Disney, the way that they approached and the way they, and that's the other thing is that regardless of what people think, like Disney still protects, it looks like they protect the IP, but they're also protecting the creative and they're protecting the story, and they're always thinking about their audience. And I always found that interesting. And so when they,
so what was the help me understand, what was the job that they were hiring you for? Like, what was the mandate of that role? Because it's a really fascinating role.
Yeah. So when the acquisition happened, Kiri Hart had, there was a group that was started called the Lucasfilm Story Group. And what they were really trying to do and trying to figure out is there's 40 years of storytelling. There have been, at that point, 6 films. When Kathy Kennedy came in, she let everybody know, let the industry know that Lucasfilm was a production company again. They're, we're getting back into it. And so it was just looking at all the parts. There was a lot of turnover. The EA deal had just been signed for games. Publishing, which had always been killing it, was trying to figure out what their path is going to be, especially with the new films coming up. And there was a lot going on. And so the story group was coming in to kind of just help with some of that transition, to try to pinpoint where the creative could go and who were the creatives that wanted to come into the Star Wars universe and build it out. The galaxy is big and wide and so many stories and amazing characters, and who are the storytellers.
Well, part of it was about story-driven, character-driven. Where do we take this franchise creatively? But it was also, and then how do we apply it to all these different platforms and business? Right. Okay.
Right. And
it wasn't just about the movies. That was a big anchor, but there's other areas too, right?
Yeah, because Lucasfilm has always been involved in every other area. A really vibrant and amazing publishing program. They've always been making great games, even games that weren't Star Wars games. The game group at Lucasfilm is truly a talented group of individuals that really love games and love players. And so it's about what is that experience to deliver to players.
Yeah.
And then also looking at just even consumer products, the way that's been run. Paul, who's the head of that, everybody there really cares. And it was great to come to, but it was it's like now it's a new day. I mean, it's Lucasfilm, not of 70s and 80s, was Lucasfilm coming into a world in which there is Harry Potter and Avengers and, every Marvel, all the DCs, Fast and Furious. There's a lot of things now vying for the attention of who was the core market. Right. And so it was great being there at that time and being a part of that, especially as a long time Star Wars nerd across all their platforms. But working with people who always just wanted to innovate in there, who always wanted to really protect and make sure that Star Wars is there for the next generation and for all people, not just for one sector that were there in 1977, 78, but for everyone, for the new kids that are coming up, and you can see it at, I've been going to Comic-Con. This year was virtually my 21st year going to Comic-Con. Wow. And to see the sea change, I remember the first time I sent a text to a friend from Comic-Con, I was like, this is the first year I've had to wait in line at the ladies' room. Like, that was a sea change. I was so excited. I was like, there's a lot of chicks here. This is great. So, and just to watch, just to see it get, the families that are at Comic-Con. And I'm using this as a comparison to also to Star Wars. The fact that Comic-Con there were more kids of color and just who were loving everything, loving anime and loving stuff coming out of, great comics coming out of Sweden and Denmark, and just voraciously taking in everything. And it's just all ethnicities, all genders, everything.
Yeah, global.
And Star Wars is reflective of that. And so it's about innovating all around there. So I got to really do what I wanted to do, which is really look at story across all platforms. And how do we do that? And how do you allow someone to just want to be only on one platform? And if they decide to then go to another platform, they're enriched by it, but they don't have to read the books to understand the movies. But if they do, it just gives them a deeper understanding. It gives them a more of a longing and more of an engagement. But you shouldn't feel like, oh man, I'm missing out if I don't read the books, or I'm missing out if I don't read the comics. I mean, in a way, you're missing out on a deepening of the story, a deepening of the characters, but you're not confused. And that's the most important thing.
What was could you give a specific example of something that you feel like how you impacted the franchise in your job, like an example of something you really have your stamp on? Or
I think we had a really great time in deepening without explaining, which is a big thing, Darth Vader. Starting with the movie I was most involved with, which was Rogue One. I mean, it's the first time anybody really saw Mustafar. And that was exciting. I mean, we knew people were going to freak out when that scene came up. Mm-hmm. And so then how do you build that? How do you also reward people who have been always talking about Mustafar and Vader and wanting to know more, but not having it explained to them? Mm-hmm. And so at that same time, I, with Kiri Hart and John Gaeta and Vicky Dobbs-Beck and Mark Miller had been thinking about ILM X-Lab, which was an exploration of Star Wars in other technologies, in VR, AR, Magic Leap, all this sort of stuff. Right. And he had joined up with The Void, which was location-based VR.
Those VR, location-based VR.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing that The Void did, and this is also looking, the way that I'm approaching franchise and strategy is that every platform, every storytelling platform does something unique and special to a story that another platform can't do. So a game can engage me bodily into a story. A book allows me to imagine what something looks like. And words, you can put as many words as you want to in a book technically, and allow the person reading it to imagine. A movie is a passive experience in which a story is being told to me. It is washing over me from far away or from my computer screen or from my TV screen. So in looking at what The Void did, The Void allows you to physically and bodily step into your story. And so when looking at that, we thought, well, we've got Mustafar, we have those assets already built because of the film, because of the genius that is John Knoll, and how can we apply that into The Void? And so we came up with a story that was on Mustafar, that is in The Void, that allowed people to imagine themselves. And so yes, we created a story within The Void, a story of like, rebels coming in, disguising themselves as stormtroopers, and they don't really know where they are, and they are also discovering this place, and then they discover Darth Vader. So we set it at a time where no one knew who Darth Vader was, and so it was a surprise to everyone, like, what the heck is this coming at us? And so then you, as the person in the headset running through the void, you're experiencing that story, but you're also putting together your own story. Who you shot, how you ran, what surprised you.
Right.
And so then looking at Darth Vader through that, you're in the distance, you see his castle, you see his abode. And so then with Oculus and Quest, we told the story inside of that. And so, because you're wondering what the heck's going on there, because in The Void, it was like an outpost that then led to his castle. And then we were telling the stories inside that there. And then along with that was an amazing storyline that was done with Marvel that also told for the story. So anyone that was able to do all of those things saw such an interesting and different view of Vader. And if you didn't, you still got whatever portion you did, and it was fun and engaging and interesting. So I think I'm most proud of that. I worked with great people on that, between Mark Miller and then also Matt Martin and Pablo Hidalgo and Leland Sheed. Like, we all worked really hard to figure out how we can put this together and make it feel seamless, but then also make people feel like they're a part of it. And that was a really important thing to do.
Did you get involved on the theme park side?
A little bit. That was really being done by Carrie Beck, because the story group there was 6, 7, 8 of us, and I was involved in the peripheral of that, and in the very beginning stages of that, working with Scott over at Disney Imagineering, and it was amazing because you had to keep quiet about everything too.
Right.
Just those initial plans and knowing that people's minds were just going to explode with Star Wars Land, which is what we called it before it became Galaxy's Edge.
Yeah.
And it was just great because you're thinking about another way. Again, that's another expression of a story world. You're thinking about it's a different way of thinking about how fans and audience will engage with the story in a location experience. And so definitely worked your mind in a different way. But I cannot take a lot of credit for that, but it was fun to be in the initial stages.
So what obviously Lucas is a very unique company, very creatively led, very authentic company. What do you think are the most important either skill or personal attribute that you think you needed to succeed in that environment? What's critical?
Critical thinking and being able to blue sky with strategy. Because you are always thinking what's next, because you always want to reward and engage, and you want to be a fan yourself and respect your fans. And so that's being able to think outside of the box, but also have strategy and figuring out how to do it, because strategy and thinking and everything else, there's still money, there's still production schedules, all of that. And so I think that it brought together, what Lucasfilm did is it brought together everything I've been doing prior to that, starting with Georgetown, everything I've done as a producer, taking off going to China, because I was a part of of working out China with Star Wars, the work I'd done at Disney, the thesis I'd done on Disney, everything kind of culminated into being at Lucasfilm, because I felt like I could stand strong in my experience and in my knowledge base with whatever's thrown at me. And the fact that I also, at that point, I had my own comic book called The Gate Crashers with Zach Mortensen that I had been building. And I had worked at a bunch of comic book companies as well prior to that, and worked at a game company. So there was a lot of things that I knew coming into that. And so at Lucasfilm, basically it was my entire background was coming into play in that one place, because I'd also done VR back in the early aughts as well. So I knew tech and I love tech. So everything culminated in this one company beautifully. Pretty lucky.
So then you went to Madison Wells, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the mandates there was to actually maybe create new IP and new franchises, right? It's not just about taking something that's been around for a long time and reshaping it or growing it or reigniting it in some way or taking it new ways. A lot of it's about creating new IP. Is that right?
Yeah, as the Deadline article announcing I was leaving Lucasfilm stated, I was there to build IP from the ground up. And it was exciting. I mean, it really, I have to give all credit to Gigi Prisker, who owns the company, who this was her idea. She really wanted to take a look at how you could build IP, to not have the pressure of having something start as a film or television, because that's 9 figures of production.
So it doesn't have to necessarily start that way.
Doesn't have to start there, because that's pressure. Because then if the film, as we saw with, unnamed franchise, I was supposed to go at unnamed studio, when that one film did not do well, you were about to mention what it was. That was good that you held that. I've learned my lesson. But the entire franchise stopped. The room stopped. Everything stopped because that one thing didn't work. And that's what happens when you have 9 figures. When you get into that number, it has to work. It's got to be 4 quadrant. Everybody's got to come. It's got to have a vibrant toy program. A lot of things have to click into place to then decide, yes, let's make it a franchise.
So how do you like launching a franchise? Is
so
it
in
more
launching
about comic books or something else?
When I'm looking at it, I'm thinking about not just, when you're trying to launch something, you're just thinking of like, well, how can I first think about the development of the story? Because first of all, you gotta love the story. That's inherent in this discussion. If you don't love the story, if you don't see how it can work, you shouldn't be doing it. And I'm first finding and thinking about and working with creatives to have a story or story idea or script or a book that has width and depth, that we can always uncover something. The example I always try to use for that is John Wick, which I am fanatical about. John Wick, yes, we loved his character, we got his pain in that first movie, but what happened was when he walked into the Continental, you're like, what in the world is happening here? You're looking at all the closed doors and you want to know what's happening behind each door. You want to know where that place came from. You want to know how he came to be. That's what stories should do. Stories should intrigue you, not confuse you when you're thinking in this way of franchise. So in looking at that, I'm thinking about, well, what's a way that I can start to develop the story, always think about it, but also start to bring in an audience. Because first I have to identify an audience. I've got to get them to know that I exist. I have to tease them to come in, get them engaged, and then I have them as a fan. So first is audience, and then you want to try to transition them into fan. And so there's a couple ways to do that. You can look at podcasts, and these are also lower. Yeah, they're kind of like lower impact in terms of they're not 9 figures of production. Sure. you can get them up and going pretty quick. You can distribute them either via a third-party distributor. So if you're looking at podcasts, you can look at a Spotify or something, or you can do it on your own. You can put it up on Apple yourself. Or same with comic books. You can go through a distributor. You can go through an IDW, Marvel, whomever else, Lion Forge, all of those. Or you can put it out yourself, which is what I did with the Gate Crashers with Zach. So looking at it in that way, at each point you're trying to build your audience, hone down and really figure out what your story is, where it can go, and you're building up. And so sometimes it can work parallel. You can, that's what happened, again, going back to Gate Crashers, my thing, like we had put out the first graphic novel ourselves, took ourselves to New York Comic Con, and then the studio started calling about it.
Right.
So then that becomes a parallel thing. So then we're talking about it moving into film while we're still continuing to make the comic book. So that's how I'm looking at building IP. And it's tough because you are putting money out with the hopes that fans and money come back. But that's the risk you have no matter what. Every time a studio makes a movie, they are doing everything they can to risk manage it. Right director, right writer, great creative. It gets done on time. It gets done at the right budget. We have got smart marketing. You can risk manage it all you want. And then a lovely little phrase that I learned at Georgetown, you got to let go and let God. And the gods are, will the audience show up? Right. And that works across any platform. Anybody that's just making something on their own, you are hoping that the audience shows up.
One thing I always say about making movies, and you'll appreciate this because of your business mind too, it's like, when you launch a movie, it's almost like creating a new entrepreneurial business. Every single time you launch a movie, it's like a startup.
Yep. Every time you do a movie, it is a brand new start. You're starting new accounting. You've got new employees coming in. It's another location every single time.
What's my marketing strategy? What's my customer value proposition? All of it.
What's the ROI? What's our long tail? Everything. So it is. It's been really interesting, especially looking at where we're at now with every studio starting up a streamer and where does that put pressure on the industry? How is the audience coming? How are we figuring it out? How are we figuring out what, it's like everyone's starting up a streamer at the same time that we've got people are under economic stress. And so they've got to decide how many things do I want to pay for per month? Then ends up everything. There's no such thing as something happening over here that doesn't affect over here. Everything, the ecosystem rolls around. Yeah. And so anything that happens to the studios will eventually roll down to creators. And I think it's keeping that in mind as I've been developing and thinking about these IP2Bs, I call them. And working with all these amazing creators like Jackie IA who has, and Jackie's really interesting. She has this property called Adorned by Chi that she built herself. She started working on it and building her own audience via Instagram who adore her as a human being, love her creative and these characters that she's created that are like 4 Nigerian girls and 1 guy that have magical powers who want to save the world. And it's a different type of storytelling. It's characters that we haven't seen before. It's a recognizable setting in terms of people getting magical powers. But it's a storyteller who's new on the scene and she's really interesting, but she's built her own business and we've come in to help amplify it. Yeah. Same with like Win Tran, who is a chef entrepreneur in LA, whose story of rising through the ashes of 2007, 2008 to now and doing the restaurant business and just being an amazing individual. I'm going to tell, I also like when I'm looking at it, when you think about franchises and anything multimedia, people generally lean on it being sci-fi or fantasy. And what I'm trying to do is also prove out that it doesn't have to be the case. And so with Win, it's a biography of a chef restaurateur. And so it is about how we look at that trajectory. And so we're telling his story. We're planning a television series as well as a nonfiction podcast, an unscripted podcast. So these are all different ways to look at story, whether we're talking a real story or a narrative fiction story.
What are what are some of the trends or changes you may see in sort of franchise strategy in the industry? Are there some things that are happening that are altering the way you think about franchises, or growing franchises, or developing franchises?
I think, and really my thinking is more hoping that things start to change a little bit, because it's still a licensing model. It is still a start with the film or television series and then license it out to other platforms. And I think that's also what creators kind of butt up against a little bit, because sometimes when you license it out, so someone has paid you money to take the IP and do with it what they want, and sometimes they don't do a great job and the creator's not involved. And I'm hoping that's starting to change a bit, so that because the audience can feel when something's inauthentic, and that's when you start to lose the audience if licensing runs off the rails. So I'm hoping that starts to change. I do think that now, especially, due to pandemic and viewing habits have started to shift a bit, I think, and I hope that there is more of a switch to understanding a lot of things that I consider to be building of the franchise and making the franchise. Some studios consider to just be marketing for the movie. And I think that needs to change. If you stop thinking about things as marketing, you think of them as a product that reaches an audience, and an audience that will hopefully pay for it. It's a revenue stream that has an amazing creative component to it. And it's also a revenue stream that can help. One of the issues I see coming up, especially with the binging of television series, the series drops and you watch it, but production takes the time it has to take. And so there can be 18 months between when you first see the first season and to the second season. Back when it was coming out each week, you don't feel that lag as much. Yeah. Exactly. So now that there is that lag because of dropping the entire series, I think that a lot of these streamers are going to have to start relying on these other platforms to hold the interest of the fans there, because there's so much stuff getting done, you're going to forget. Right. How do you keep that connection during that dormant period when the show's not on? Exactly. That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's interesting. That is, I think, one of the biggest gaps that needs to be filled, is looking at how you keep a franchise alive. Because I do think that what is going on is that there's still that traditional thinking of, and needs to change, this really needs to change, that a lot of the older people in the industry feel that, well, you can't do other stories elsewhere because it cannibalizes this main thing. So if you do tell a story in a book, people aren't going to come to the television series. That is fundamentally incorrect, and that thinking needs to stop. The audience, when they love it, they want to read it, they want to play it, they want to watch it. And to deny them that right to stay engaged with the story and with the characters is folly. And it's also, you are leaving money on the table. So you can look at it from both sides. I'll say this from a creator side. I want people who identify themselves as fans of something I'm making to always be able to find that thing, to always be able to engage with it, to listen, play, hear, watch, whatever it is. And then strictly from the business side, why would you not want to get that fans money? So I just think both sides have to balance themselves out and really recognize that this is where the market is going, and this is where the fans are, and the fans are really, and the audience is really demanding to be able to engage with things when they want it and how they want it. And I think that is a phrase that is said a lot in the industry, but I just don't think people understand what that means. It's not meaning that the audience is being big fat babies, gimme, gimme, gimme now. They're saying, hey, I'm at home listening to a podcast. Why can't this podcast be also maybe a storyline from this movie that I love, and you're taking 20 years to make the sequel. Right. That's all they're saying. Like, let me continue to love. Let me love you. That's all the audience is saying. They just want it. They just want to love you. Yeah, that's it. Exactly. I want to shift gears to another topic that I'd like to get your thoughts on. Obviously, in the country, there's been quite a lot that's gone on last 6 to 9 months, and some real unrest and turmoil, and it's made I think the industry have to look in the mirror a bit about the kind of images and stories they put on the screen, about the people who are telling those stories, and about the people who are actually greenlighting those stories. And I'd like to just get your take on
your views of that as the industry moves forward and tries to, figure out maybe a better way to approach this issue.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking about that, especially, I'm entering my 30th year in the industry.
Yeah.
The industry has a big megaphone, and the entertainment moves culture, and we can either move it forward or backwards. And what we have to remember, just speaking only traditionally, is that the moving image is reflective, generally speaking, of the times that we're living in. But until recently, it's only been via a monolithic POV. And we can go back to Birth of a Nation. That film, I know, classic and DGA Awards and blah, blah, blah. But let's be clear, it legitimized the KKK. And therefore, that image persists in our culture today. So the more that the creators reflect the world, the stories reflect the world, because people are a spectrum, stories are a spectrum. And we in the entertainment industry need to provide that spectrum via the things that we make that for people to see, play, watch, do, listen. So we have a culpability. And I think that we have to show people all around. I mean, it was hard for me to grow up at a time, I think my mother has had a lot of disappointments in me. And one of her biggest ones was that I was supposed to go into science. That was the original plan, is that because I was so just crazy bananas about biology growing up, like in second grade, third grade. I was dissecting everything. She'd buy everything for me to dissect. But I didn't know that there was such a thing as Black scientists. I never saw them. They weren't on TV. They weren't in anything I was reading, nothing. And I pulled away. And that was always her greatest sadness. And so
Well, that's a really important illustrative example.
Yeah. And so, and it's not to say that, I think the problem with Hollywood is that it always swings to one side. It's like, this is bad. Okay, we're going to swing to this side. It's like, just be normal. It's like, just be cool, man. You can do this. Be cool. So how do we just present all kind of cool images? We're not saying we have to always be the president of the United States, but where's a really cool Latinx Hannibal Lecter? Right. Let's just present a really great spectrum of really interesting characters. It's not about the strong female protagonist, because that's a ridiculous phrase. Just give me a good character and give a good story that just represents the audience that you are trying to engage with. And so we're culpable, absolutely, in the unrest that we're in because of the images we pulled up. But I do think that the more that we think about bringing in new voices and bringing in other creators and the gatekeepers, because we can, and for a while it's always about look, there's more people of color on screen. I'm like, yeah, but they're all still being created by the same guy. So and then it's now being greenlit by the same people. And so they only really want to see themselves. That's just fact. The number of times that I walk into a room and I am the only one. Look, this is not a game of Highlander. I don't believe in the only one game. We need to have more people at the table, because it's also diversity of thought that is needed. Right. Because if everybody went to Harvard Westlake and then went to Harvard and their mom was an artist and their dad was a TV producer, they're all the same person. Even if they're different ethnicity, they're all the same person. They all think the same way. We need people who think differently. We need people who come from different parts of the country, other parts of the world, because they're always going to bring a different perspective, whether we're talking creative or business. And that just always helps innovation, and that makes everything better. So I just think if we get better all around on screen, the people who create the images on screen in terms of directing, the people who write those images on screen, and the people who greenlight those images, I think that the industry, will do what its promise is, which is to entertain us, all of us.
Thank you for that. That was very, very insightful. I appreciate it. Let's finish with a question I'm sure you get a lot, but I know that a lot of our audience always likes to hear the answer to. Which
Yes, blue is my regular hair color. Yes, that is true.
how did you guess?
Or blue.
How did you know? Advice for young people, wanting to break into this industry. I guess even, particularly in the areas that you've been in. What are your sort of like 2 or 3 key pieces of advice that you like to give?
It's a great question. I do get asked it a lot because usually I'm asked like how I started, and the way I started just doesn't exist.
Right. Based on based on the story you told.
Yeah, I mean, remember, I had to send
unique
scripts. Scripts had to be sent by mail, $3.95. That one stamp. That it was 2 days. It was crazy. So I think it's taking advantage of the technology that is available and getting yourself out there. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Because the thing that I do love about this industry versus like when I was trying to be an investment banker is that there technically aren't any rules to getting in. Like
Right.
you go to college or not go to college.
Yeah.
You go to film school or not go to film school. Yeah. There's no like you don't have
to be a business school undergraduate degree and become a creative.
Yes, exactly. So that's a great part. But it's kind of like I was compared to like a Monet painting. Like from far away, you're like, I can do this, and you get up close, and you're like, oh, it's a lot of dots. What? It's like you start to see all these obstacles in your way. So I think it is understanding that you have to have the guts for it and the ability to be really open and just super ambitious. And so if you decide that you want to be a director, you got a camera, it's on your phone, start putting stuff up. There's Instagram, there's Vimeo, there's so many things. Start putting stuff up, start getting people to understand who you are visually. I keep thinking about this kid, I say kid because everybody's younger than me, Julian Bass, who just had great videos that he started putting up, and then one really started taking hold, and it got sent around, and then finally got sent to Iger at Disney, and then like, he's on his way, but he just continued to put stuff up. He also, he's mad talented as well. Yeah. So, and if you're a writer, there's plenty of places to put stuff up. You can think about doing something on Wattpad. You can write your own novel and put it up on Kindle Free. There's a lot of things you can do to get your creative out there so people can at least somehow find you. Because it is hard, because for me, I can't take a script that doesn't come in from an agent or a manager or a lawyer or somebody that I know. Legally, I just cannot do it. That makes it hard. Every company is the same way. Yep. And I know that can feel really unfair, but there's a real reason. People like to sue. That's so right. You can't do it. So that does make it hard. So I do think that you just have to just be as persistent as you can in figuring out how to get forward. If you want to be a producer, you can always find somebody that wants to figure out how to shoot something, and then you are producing because you're putting that thing together. You're making sure that the financing's there, whether it is like your credit card or whether it is like, do you have a camera? Here's an extra Android, let's shoot it. Like, that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
I think that's really the only advice I can give. Like, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of film schools because it's a lot of money, but it is how you start to form your tribe. And I think the most important thing I can say is you have to have your tribe. It is who you come up with, it's who you lean on, it's who hears about jobs, it's who you decide to shoot a short film with. It's everything. And like,
that's a really good point.
Yeah, to today, I'm still with the same tribe that I really started out with. It's still a group of female who are, it runs a range of, there's a couple filmmakers, most are execs, others are producers, because we came up all at the same time in the indie world in New York. And it's just important. And that's the most important thing, is identifying your tribe, because that is how you get through. And again, that is like one of the nice things about film schools, that you do form your tribe and you do hear more about things. But I don't know, is there a better way to spend $80,000? Maybe.
That is fantastic. No, those are good insights that haven't always been shared. So I love when I hear new nuggets.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Diana, this has been terrific. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to post this one, because there's such an interesting career arc, and have done so many different interesting, worked in so many different interesting pieces of the business, and your energy and curiosity come through a lot, come through beautifully. So
Oh, good. I'm glad. I was worried that because I talk really fast, especially when I get excited. So
yeah. Thank you so much for doing it.
totally, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
It's good meeting you.
Enjoy the weekend.
You too.
Bye,
Bye.
man.